Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the final panel of the day. My name is Bülent Keneş, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Executive Director of ECPS. I hope you are caffeinated, alert, and ready to go. Because we are about to dive into one of the thorniest, most fascinating intersections in global politics. I mean, religion and populism. Let's not sugarcoat it. This topic refuses to sit neatly in one box. Religion cuts across borders, fuels ideologies, and drives identity politics. Whether it is sacred language used to rally voters or cultural grievances wrapped in religious packaging, populist movements are putting faith to political work in ways we can't afford to ignore. Today, we unpack how this happens locally, nationally, and across global networks. Now, before we get started, a quick but important note. Due to the ongoing and intensifying conflict in Israel and Gaza, both Professor Jocelyne Cesari, our moderator, and Professor Ben-Porat, one of our key speakers, were unable to travel due to canceled flights and airspace restrictions. But despite all that, they are still joining us live, as in morning Cesari did, online. And we are very grateful they could make it under such difficult circumstances. Their virtual presence is a powerful reminder of just how urgent and real the issues we are discussing today truly are. Our thoughts are, of course, with everyone affected by the violence. So here's the game plan for panel 3. First, Professor Jocelyne Cesari will kick us off with a framing introduction on the global dynamics of religion and populism, big picture stuff to set the tone, as she did in the morning. Then joining us online, Professor Ben-Porat will take us into the Israeli context with Remember to be Jewish, Religious Populism in Israel, the title. This is a crucial look at how faith is being politically mobilized in one of the most contested regions on the planet. After that, we shift to a broader international lens with Professor Ihsan Yilmaz and Dr. Nicholas Morieson, who will unpack how religious populism and civilizational rhetoric are merging with authoritarian politics. It is global and it is so worrying. Next, Dr. Rafael Soborski takes us to post-Brexit Britain with a provocative question. National populists of Christian Europe unite, civilization's dimensions of far-right populist alliances in post-Brexit Britain. It's a deep dive into far-right Christian populist alliances and whether there is something more organized behind the rhetoric. And finally, we head to Southeast Asia with Dr. Siaza Shukri, who will explore Anwar Ibrahim's civilizational populism as a complex, thoughtful case study on how faith, populism, and identity play out in Malaysia and the broader Muslim world. It's a packed session, cross-regional, intellectually rich, and politically urgent. So let's stay sharp, engage deeply, and get your question ready for the Q&A session. Professor Ihsan Yilmaz will also be on hand to help facilitate the discussion with Professor Cesari during and at the end of the panel if needed. And with that, I will hand it over to our moderator, Professor Jocelyne Cesari. Jocelyne, the floor is yours.
Hello. Again, it's not the best condition to moderate a panel when the moderator is online, but I will try to do my best. I won't be very long because I already said or presented most of the framing in the lecture this morning. What I want to insist on is indeed the transnational aspect, because usually populism is studied within national configurations. And the interest, quote unquote, of having a religious dimension in populist politics is to be able to tap into the transnational component of most of religion, especially the monotheistic ones. So it does give a breadth, a dimension, a size, I would say, to populist politics that is not as easily conveyed if you are just a nativist. And that's why I think it's important here. I heard a lot about what is populism. This is not new. That's been discussed since the term emerged. But what everybody agrees on is that there is one horizontal aspect of populism, which is mobilizing the people. And in the case we're going to discuss this afternoon, it's about mobilizing them, identifying them primarily through religion, mostly dominant religion, but not always. And associating ethnicity, religion, and territory in one bundle. And the second dimension of populism is geared at destroying or replacing the political establishment. And the two together makes populism different from other forms of illiberal democracy or authoritarian regime. You can have authoritarian regime who do not have an understanding of the people based on this polarity between good or bad, pure, impure, or victim and oppressor. I think that's an important point to say here. And on the other side, you may have lots of nativist discourse without automatically aiming at changing the institutions, the political institution on the countries based on some religious values or prescription. And in this sense, I think that we can still use the term populist. So not all authoritarian leaders are populist, but lots of populists today, especially when they mobilize religion, tend to become more authoritarian. I think Erdogan is a good case in point. He started and as in a push to democratize Turkey. The 2 mandates of Trump is a good case in point also, and also Putin. So, and I can multiply the example, but you have populists who are not automatically authoritarian, in the sense that they can use mobilization on the horizontal level of the people. They don't want to bypass or undermine the rule of law, for example, or the separation of the three orders, executive, judiciary, executive, legislative, or judiciary. So that's just to remind or recap in which kind of framework we can discuss religion and politics. And again, I'm very happy that there is a special panel on transnational aspects, because it's not only the instrumentalization of a very clever leader. And I was very interested in all the discussion on emotion. It does talk to people beyond boundaries. And that's also part of the efficiency of a populist leader, to be able to mobilize beyond national borders based on this transnational aspect of lots of religious communities. So without further ado, I don't want to take more time because we have lots of interesting papers lined up. So I'm going to give the floor to Professor Guy Ben-Porat, my colleague at Ben-Gurion University. And again, I was told I give you 20 minutes. So maybe someone on site can also discreetly back me up when I start raising hands, saying you have gone beyond your time. So Guy, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'll just share my PowerPoint if I may. Is it on? Can you see the PowerPoint? So first, I also want to apologize for not being with you in Warsaw. I must say that this this loss is minuscule compared to the catastrophe that's going on in Gaza these moments. This ongoing and, I must say, pointless war where blood is being spilled may be a good example of what populism can lead to. I can only hope that next time this war will be over and everyone will be back to sanity. So my apologies. And again, I think that this catastrophe is much more important than what I'm going to say here. So I will talk about populism in Israel, now intersects with religion. And I want to start with a small picture from 1997. This is Netanyahu, then a rather young prime minister, who comes to visit Rabbi Kaduri. He was a famous rabbi, kind of a mystical figure. Netanyahu was caught whispering in his ear, the left have forgotten what it means to be Jewish. So kind of making the boundaries. We, the right, know what being Jewish is about. The left are not really Jewish. On the others column is a statement made by Avi Gabay, a would-be prime minister 10 years later, who was leader of the Labour Party, of the left. And he was actually kind of saying, well, maybe not in so many words, but we need to get closer to being Jewish. So I'm leader of a social democratic party from the left, but our problem is that we withdrew from Judaism. So the Labour Party, under Gabay's leadership, according to his idea, should stress more its Jewish identity. He failed, he's gone, but I think the main point is that how being Jewish is a part of Israeli politics. I'll try to connect that to populism. Another picture, Morieson Netanyahu, in a traditional tefillin, and he was making sure he'll be seen in this picture on the papers. Again, Netanyahu, who is not a religious person, but this image of him praying is another statement. I'm part of the people. I am attached to religion. Again, it's not religion per se, it's religion as a demarcation, I think, of nationalism. That's what I'm trying to talk about in this lecture. So I'm saying that populism is central characteristics of Israeli politics that describes several parties in Israel, Likud one of them, I'll talk about the Likud today, and that populism often emerges in societies where conflicts are about inclusion and exclusion of subordinate groups, and the people as is a signified thing that becomes a reference point for identities. So by analyzing the Israeli case, I want to demonstrate how religion can play a role in both inclusive and exclusive elements of populism. And I also want to say that religion here is used often as a marker of identity more than religion per se, more than about belief and commitment to religious mores. So populism, and I'll be short about that because I'm sure everyone knows the literature. Populism has kind of two main themes. One of the antagonists between the elites and the pure people, the corrupt elite and the pure people, and democracy expressing popular sovereignty. So in this paper, I'll talk about populism as a kind of a family of movements, which presents different hegemonic projects, trying to become hegemonic through a populist position. And we can talk about inclusive populism, which is about we are the people too. So here a political party will try to claim it has a place on the political table, so to speak. It also has a right to be represented. Exclusionary populism is about an organic view of the people. That's saying, no, there's a way to become a people which is inherently exclusive. So in this case, populism is about setting the boundaries between the people and the non-people. So in the Israeli case, it could be migrant workers, ethnic minorities, Arab citizens. Different people can be a threat to the organic nation, and also sometimes elites. So both elites and foreigners are presented as a threat to the nation, which populists are deemed to protect. Now, where does religion come in? So the people is often an empty signifier. You're saying the people, what makes the people? How do you define the people? So religion can perform an essential role in definition of the people, in delineating boundaries of exclusion and inclusion, and adding content and justification. So I mean in that religious tropes are used to delineate boundaries and strengthen the us-them dichotomy. So religion can be kind of a language of exclusion and inclusion. National discourse, often supplemented by religion. So you talk to the people of the nation, you use religion to kind of demarcate the people. And of course, it's about authenticity. So religion is also a marker of who are the real people. So again, it's about making boundaries through tropes, practices, and often laws. Now, going to Israel, Israel is an interesting case because if you go back to the origins of Zionism, it was a secular movement in the sense that it rebelled against religion. So in the late 19th century, Jewish people in Europe talk about the need to form a homeland, which goes against the notion of what the rabbis are saying. From the religious perspective, this should wait till the Messiah comes. Zionism kind of goes against that current. We should not wait till the Messiah comes. We should act now, according to the nation's need. So religion is not a major part, but it does become so. Because when Zionism emerges and becomes more popular, it needs to bring religious people in and to demarcate boundaries. So religion comes in very handy on both cases. So you make compromises with religious groups to have them inside the Zionist camp. And when you try to create a nation, a modern nation with symbols and with boundaries, religion is often a tool for all these things. So in the early years of statehood, there's an ambivalent relation between religion and nationalism. They're both there, but still the Labour Party is, at least in essence, a secular party that makes compromises with religious parties, and religion is instrumental to define boundaries. But when the Likud comes into power in 1977, things begin to change. The symbolic importance of religion becomes larger. And I'm referring to the picture I showed before. So it becomes more and more clear that religion is not simply a marker, it has some more content, and it creates more obligations, and it's more about demarcation than it was before. And the Likud's history, kind of interesting to show that kind of development. So when the Likud comes into power, it comes actually in the form of an exclusive populism. Menachem Begin, the Likud legendary leader, comes to power as representing the masses, the people, the Mizrahim, the immigrants who came from North Africa and other Muslim countries. They were marginalized, they were on the sideline, they suffered from different kinds of racism and different kinds of offenses. And Begin tells them, I will represent you. We are the right-wing party who was also sidelined by the Labour Party, and we can make kind of a partnership. All of us who were excluded can come together and defeat the Labour Party. And that is the victory of 1977. It's a party, the Likud, who forms an exclusive kind of populism, the people versus the elites of the Labour Party, which brings them into power. Now, for Begin, religion was more important than for the Labour Party. He was more attached to religion as a symbolic thing, but also to religion per se. He always stressed the Jewish religion as part of identity. But Begin was also a strong Democrat. He also had a liberal component. So for Begin, the rule of law and questions of freedoms were very important. He kind of combined those two issues of being an inclusive populist, attached to religion, but at the same time, a liberal on many fronts. Netanyahu has changed the Likud. Netanyahu came to the Likud in 1996. He was initially a neocon, kind of emulating the neoconservative notion in the US, kind of how very strong neoliberal economics and hawkish foreign policy, very much kind of in line with what happened in the US, but it quickly became, with the Likud, a populist party, anti-liberal in terms of how he perceives democracy, and becoming more and more close to what we see as right radical parties in Europe. So we can talk about Likud becoming from a liberal, kind of attached to religion party into a populist party, an exclusionary populist party. Now, Netanyahu uses religion a lot, both to demarcate boundaries, to exclude, but also to establish hierarchies within the Jewish nation. When Netanyahu talks about the left, people who forgot to be Jewish, it's a hierarchy. The elites are not really Jewish, they only pretend to be so, while we, the masses, we are the real people. We are attached to religion. So much, very much like Trump, although he himself is not religious and his personal history does not show religiosity, he presents himself as part of the people, and the people are religious. Religious is being nationalist, and the left, who is non-religious, is also less of a patriot, nationalist person. So in 1997, he uses this in the first time when he talks about the left as those who forgot what it is to be Jewish. So if you are part of the people, you have to vote for the Likud or right-wing parties. And the ideas of the left of compromise with the Palestinians are presented as disloyalty. So the left is disloyal, the people are loyal, religion and territoriality is about being loyal. In 2015, election day, he makes another move. When the polls show that Netanyahu is trailing, he goes on social media and urges the people to go out and vote because the Arab citizens are voting in large numbers and they're being driven to the polls by leftist NGOs. So you make this thing together. So you have the
Guy, may I interrupt you? Your slides are not moving. If you can move the slides.
Oh.
Yeah.
Now? No?
I think you are way down.
It should be right in populism at the
Yeah, that probably.
You see it now?
Yes, yes, thank you.
2015 is there?
Yes, I can see now. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. So on 2015 election day, Netanyahu calls upon the good Jewish people to go out to vote because Arab citizens are presenting a risk to the country. So you have it together. You have the Arabs who are non-Jewish and a threat to the nation, and the leftist NGOs who are colliding with the Arabs. That's how you create a populist exclusivist stance. Same with asylum seekers. He talks about asylum seekers as a threat to the nation. So foreigners become kind of a threat to the nation. So do Arab citizens. And the leftist elites are using both to undermine the power of the real people. That's how you present populist politics in Israel. Now, what we're witnessing now is kind of a new kind of populism. It's not the Menachem Begin one, of inclusive one. It's an exclusive populism where religion becomes more instrumental and more explicit. Religiosity becomes a litmus test for loyalty. It separates authentic members of the nation from elites who are cosmopolitan and disloyal. So being Jewish is being patriotic. The language used and the symbol accentuate fear. We are under threat of losing our identity, of losing our country, losing our nation. We must defend the Jewish homeland. And as a result, this becomes more and more entrenched with more political parties. So the Labour Party, which I showed in the first slide, is trying to kind of answer back. Yes, we are Jewish. Yes, we are attached to religion. No, we have not forgotten what it means to be Jewish. So the discourse of religion and politics kind of penetrates into other parties. But then the Likud, on some aspects, is still liberal. That's one of the paradoxes. Because, for example, one of the main members of the Likud, today he is the chairman of the parliament, is openly gay. And he has a strong power in the party. When you poll Likud supporters on questions of religious authority and practices, many of them will display a mild liberalism. They're okay with civil marriage. They're okay with LGBTQ. They're okay with single motherhood. So they're liberal, and that's kind of something I'm developing now, how liberalism can be within the camp. So liberalism has limits. We can be liberal within the Jewish camp. So if you're gay and Jewish, you can be part of the camp. So being Jewish is kind of the first criteria to be part of the people. So when you match religion, the way the Likud uses it, and the way religious parties use it, it's different use. That's where we see some frictions within this existing coalition. Because for Likud, it's mostly about demarcating boundaries. It's about separating the good Jews from the leftists and the non-Jews. But for the religious parties, it's also about having religious mores and laws in the Jewish state. Likud members think that the young Orthodox Jews should join the army. Orthodox thinks they should stay and study Torah. These are kind of conflicts you have within the right-wing camp, which are developed in other papers. But I think there's a more important development. And again, I'll show you a picture. Itamar Ben-Gvir, on this picture, is today the minister in charge of police. For many years, Ben-Gvir was a pariah politician. He was an extreme right-wing. He's a disciple of Rabbi Kahana, who used to be an ostracized politician, who talked who actually was not allowed to be in the parliament because of his racism. Ben-Gvir is a disciple of Kahana. He a bit moderated some of the things Kahana said, but in his living room, he had a picture of Baruch Goldstein. Baruch Goldstein is a religious fanatic who opened fire in a Muslim synagogue and killed about 40 people praying. So Goldstein was one of Ben-Gvir heroes. Now, Netanyahu has declared he will not sit with Ben-Gvir on the coalition. When I'm going to build a coalition, he will not be a minister. After the election, Netanyahu brought him inside the coalition, has made him into a senior minister, and now you see the two together almost as brothers. So I think that the Likud now is becoming not only an exclusive populist party, but also an extreme right-wing party. And we are seeing this impact also on the war in Gaza, where religion is used to justify whatever Israel does, when the war is defined also as a holy war by some of the politicians, and even those who don't kind of try to look away from this combination of religion, right-wing fanaticism, and a war that is led for a purpose which we are not sure what it is yet. So that's what happens with the Likud. That's the kind of the third round. So we begin with neoconservatism. We continued into a populism. And I think now we're on the verge of maybe kind of a neo-fascism. That will be kind of the third move of the Likud. So in conclusion, I would say that both populist movements, whether they're inclusive or exclusive, use this friend-enemy distinction between the people and others, elites, immigrants, and minorities. Creating the people is not something self-evident because it's always changing. So you need to kind of put a content, kind of define what the boundaries are. So that's where religion is very instrumental. Being Jewish is something that's kind of stable. we know that Jewish people, who they are and where they belong. And we can make it into the kind of both towards outsiders who are not Jewish and towards insiders who are not Jewish enough in terms of being patriotic and nationalistic or religious. So the Likud party, who uses religion mostly as an instrumental way, as a marker of threat, was able to build itself as the real Jewish people, representing the authentic Judaism and putting on the other side the Muslim enemies and the secular left. Thank you very much. I'll end here. I think I'm on time.
Thank you very much, Guy. Maybe you can, stop sharing. So now I give the floor to our next speakers, Dr. Rafal Soborski, Michal Garapich, and Anna Jocelyne. I don't know how you're going to hold 20 minutes with 3 speakers, but let's try, okay? I cannot hear.
Now better?
Yes.
Yeah, it's just myself representing our team at London Metropolitan University. And our presentation is about Polish migrants' involvement with far-right politics in Britain and civilizationist threats, themes, tropes that they mobilize in the process. Next slide, please. So if we could go to the next slide, that would be great. So this is research in progress. I have to acknowledge our funder, European Economic and Social Research Council. We've produced so far these 3 publications, but many more are in preparation. Next slide, please. This is an interdisciplinary project, so we apply methods of political science, critical discourse analysis to various groups, political output, but we also use ethnographic methods, and we apply them to spaces of transnational civilizationist politics, such as community events, broader Polish community events. They are not necessarily explicitly political, but they usually do have political stalls. Visits of radicals from Poland, Polish politicians trying to cater for the Polish minority, political demonstrations, most recently marches in support of Tommy Robinson, but also Independence March in Warsaw, in which many far-right British figures participate. Political conferences, we attended Reform UK conference in September, Traditional Britain Group, it's to the right of Reform UK, a meeting in London, a conference in London was attended by Michal. Also commemoration rituals around deathscapes, so Polish cemeteries, the new generation of migrants try to claim for themselves a place in Polish Britain history by relating to the post-Second World War migration, those soldiers, refugees who ended up in Britain and are buried there. Music concerts with Polish nationalist rappers. In fact, on this upper photo, you see a Polish pilots monument to commemorate Polish pilots and some far-right celebrations around it. And there was a gig by a Polish nationalist rapper on screen transmitted live from Poland. Also religious ceremonies and religious groups. Below you see Warriors of Mary. That's this fundamentalist all-male brotherhood which is quite strong in Britain, created in Poland, but quite strong in Britain. And then, of course, online spaces. Next slide, please. So in terms of of our data, we've conducted 72 in-depth interviews. Some of them lasted for 6 hours. Narrative, biographical, exploring migration and radicalization trajectories. But we also spoke with British leaders. We also had dozens of informal conversations, online chats, and so on. We have approximately 300 people on our potential interviewees list, but also a relatively high level of refusals. And the rule is that the refusals are mainly from either high-end politicians or from people who are in underground neo-Nazi networks such as Blood and Honor, for instance. We interviewed people in Britain and Poland, and we also wrote 40 ethnographic reports from relevant events. Next slide, please. As for respondents, very briefly, they are British leaders, they are Polish activists, some returnees, people who were convicted in Britain and then following the completion, if that's the word of their sentence, deported back to Poland, members of neo-Nazi structures, members of neo-pagan networks as well, warriors of Mary, and Polish and British far-right influencers. And I'll come back, next slide, please. I'll come back to our respondents in a moment, but just to make this orderly, you know, that's how we sort of understand civilizationist populism. We adopt Muda's perspective as applied by Yilmaz and Morieson, civilizationist populism as this antagonism between the virtuous, decent people and the corrupted elites, but the addition is that these elites are seen as colluding with hostile civilization, representatives of hostile civilizations as they see them. So recalibration of nationalist rhetoric around broader transnational categories and management by far-right groups of who can be excluded and who can be included, right? Some minorities, some migrants repositioned not as threats, but as co-defenders of a common civilizational order. And this leads to selective reproduction of racism. Next slide, please. So civilizationism, you probably all know these contributions, has been studied from several perspectives as a meta-theoretical lens in far-right philosophy, Dugin in Russia, Alain de Benoit in France. It's been studied as paradigm in IR challenging liberal internationalism. I guess Trump would belong here. Discourse employed by national populist parties. Also the relationship between civilizationism and white supremacy has been a focus of research. Relationship between civilizationism and nationalism, also different variants of civilizationism depending on national context. But focus in all this literature tends to be on elite official ideological output, and more diffuse civilizationist tropes evident in thinking of everyday sympathizers has not been given comparable attraction. We believe that's to some extent due to rarity of ethnographic approaches in this field. Next slide, please. The question that you may be asking is perhaps why Poles, as I will be arguing, they are particularly attractive to the British far-right. I guess in far-right imageries globally, Poland being a relatively ethnically homogeneous country, one associated with traditional values, one perceived as highly religious, and also one that has been quite successful economically in recent decades, is seen as this model to emulate. And here you have visual messages on social media of various figures of the far right and extreme right, and you can see that the emphasis is on whiteness, the emphasis is on Poles supposedly not accepting, you know, the imposition of multiculturalism and political correctness. And next slide, please. What we see in those diffuse social media fragments is really perhaps unconscious but quite effective mobilization of Polish romantic nationalism. So this idea of the messianic role of Poland as the Christ of nations, defender of the West against enemies, external and within, being ready to sacrifice for freedom, this idea of a masculine, heteronormative warrior and defender. And there is this emphasis also on diasporic culture. I mean, you have references to migration and diaspora even in Polish national anthem. And due to long history of Polish migration, this is key. Many of these migrants position themselves as signalists, as those who come with knowledge from a country that's been oppressed by foreign powers, that's been oppressed by communists. So they see themselves as those that are able to warn the West. And Europe here is identified with Christianity and implicitly with whiteness, and Poland sees itself as this bulwark of Christianity. Poland in nationalist interpretation. So I mentioned, next slide please, I mentioned these messages from various far-right influencers, but this Polish romantic nationalism is reproduced also through transnational networking. I mean, the annual Independence March in Warsaw is probably the largest nationalist demonstration in the EU, with significant presence from European countries and from the United States and from Canada. And it has also received reinforcement from Donald Trump, who chose Warsaw during his first term as the place for his main European speech. And you can see the quote really amplifying these ideas of Poles as warriors defending tradition, Europe, Christianity. Now, in terms of Poles in the UK, I don't want you to leave you with the impression that this is a minority that's uniformly nationalist. Far from that. And by the way, for those of you who don't know, this is a very significant minority following enlargement of the EU. In 2004, 1 million Poles arrived in a matter of just a few years. The number has declined due to the pandemic, Brexit, also the fact that Britain is in decline economically, whereas Poland seems to be booming, so a lot of people come back, but still there are around 700,000 Poles living in Britain. Most of them accept diversity. You see pictures here of Poles in Britain protesting against decline of democracy under a law and justice government. There are economic enterprises, there are cultural associations that have nothing to do with the far right. But having said that, more voters in Britain voted for the far-right Konfederacja Party than was the overall share, 10% versus 7%. And in the first round of Poland's presidential elections this month, 30% voted for far-right candidates. And I'm not including Law and Justice in the far-right for the purpose of this. So it was Brown and Menton. In some locations, Stoke-on-Trent, some other locations which voted for Brexit overwhelmingly, more than 50% of Polish voters who decided to vote cast their votes for Konfederacja. So a minority, but still significant. Now, our first case of this opening and collaboration is Tommy Robinson. Tommy Robinson in 2009 was a co-founder of English Defence League. English Defence League mobilized civilizationist themes, but mainly around secularism. So he claimed that he was defending LGBTQ community and that he was defending women and Western values against Islam. Having said that, you can see whom he headhunted as his security. Sorry, I forgot to ask you to change the slide, but you can see them on the next slide. His security with, oh yeah, with Nazi emblems was Robinson who had hunted them. You can see Polish flag at one of the events of EDL. There was a Polish division of EDL. The organization is now defunct, but Robinson continues to use increasingly civilizationist discourse. And one example of this, next slide please, is his reporting, quote unquote, from the Warsaw's Independence Day in 2017. On the right-hand side, you see images from that short video who had over 500,000 views, and some quotes. It's over 9 minutes long, so these are just selected quotes, you know, elevating Poland to this role of defender of Christianity, Islam, you've got no chance in Poland, and then performance of this empathetic identification with Polish heroic history, and then really powerful reproduction of the Polish mythology as this bulwark of Christianity. And then a more closer link between Poland and Britain, that it wouldn't have been, Britain would not have existed if it wasn't for the Polish. Now, before I get to what Polish activists in his circles told us, we should know that there is always some spin doctor, some money as well behind this kind of ideological rapprochement, and in this case it was Stefan Thompson, South African and Pole, who invited Robinson in 2017 to Poland. There was a large meeting held in Thompson's house. You can see him speaking with Robinson more recently. And another influence is Elon Musk. So you see how these influences circulate at different levels. Thompson has actually been called by Financial Times as the most significant influence on Musk's shift towards the right and on Musk's shift towards Netanyahu and also Robinson's endorsement of Netanyahu. And you can see here Elon Musk reposted Thompson's video with interview with Robinson, 44 million views when we watched it. Now, 6 years later, Tommy Robinson is serving an 18-month sentence, 6 years after the march that I discussed, an 18-month sentence for contempt of court. His interest in Poland has waned, but there is interestingly a very different attitude to this from older Polish migrants and from younger ones. The older Polish migrants who came to Britain in 2004, 2005, really craved recognition from figures like Robinson. They wanted to be tokenized in a way as belonging to Britain, that they pursued what we call integration through racism. And they were very disappointed that this interest in Robinson's thinking waned. On the other hand, migrants who arrived in the last 5 years have a very different attitude. They see themselves as assertively and confidently part of the civilizationist far right. They do not mediate their self-understanding, political understanding of themselves through Polish nationalism. They interestingly tell us that actually they don't need to support Polish nationalism because it's strong enough, and that they are there to help British nationalists as those ideological nationalist importers. Right, so an interesting shift, and we see it also. Next slide, please, with Britain First. This is a Christian fundamentalist party, so a different kind of civilization. It's populism, really revolving around Christianity. Anti-migrant party, but one where, when you read their program specific points, they always target and vilify Muslims. In 2014, they invaded mosques in Bradford and Glasgow, trying to force the worshipping Muslims there to accept copies of the Bible. In 2015, they turned up in East London carrying large crosses, conducted those Christian patrols, as they called it, and they were retweeted on many occasions by Donald Trump, so received support from him. And they have quite an interesting position on Poland, particularly behind this was Jada Franzen, who was briefly the deputy leader, and then a leader when the leader, that is to say, Paul Golding, was in prison. She then famously said, "I would take 1 million Poles into our country before I took one Islamic immigrant." They visited Poland on many occasions, tried to bring some radicals from Poland to the UK, including ex-priest Jacek Międlar, but he was stopped by the British authorities. Now, we have here, next slide please, we have here another speech act about Poles and about civilizationism, and that's a message to the Polish community living in Britain, recorded again in 2016 by Jada Franzen. You can see it started with Polish flag and Union Jack sort of blending behind her, and then there are references to King Sobieski and his 1683 victory near Vienna as part of the same struggle that Poles and Brits are engaged in now, right? So you can see those highly Islamophobic statements from Jada, and images of her invading those mosques in London, and then below that is the Polish independence march in Warsaw. And then you have Polish supporters interviewed on British streets and declaring their unequivocal support for Britain First. We also interviewed, next slide please, one of the main leaders of Britain First. He also attended the independence march in Warsaw, and these are his thoughts about Warsaw still being Polish, whereas London can't be British. And he also mentioned the actions where they hang those banners over bridges, and he claimed that when a car with a PL on the plate passes with Polish plates, they will always give them thumbs up and beep them. Right. Again, next slide, please. We have two interesting cases of two migrants and how they exemplify how this attitude of Polish migrants has been changing. So Bartosz is clearly a case of, and we anonymized their names, changed their names, is a case of radicalization through migration. He had quite high status in communist Poland as a sportsman, but lost his status in the 1990s, moved to the UK in his late 40s, right after the enlargement, works as a cleaner, and is extremely Islamophobic, Catholic conservative, homophobic. He's a live member of Britain First, very active in rallies. You can see him always in front of demonstrations, and, you know, together with Jada Franzen and Paul Golding, the very leadership of Britain First, they convinced them to wear those Polish emblems. And in his narratives, I didn't include quotes, but in his narratives, he sees himself as a Polish fighter, fighting for Christianity, and he believes that this gives him status, prestige in the eyes of British far-right activists. So clearly a case of integration through racism. Another Polish supporter, much younger, and one who arrived much later, illustrates how these younger migrants didn't arrive into Britain radicalized from Poland. He knew very little about the Polish far right. He was not interested in Polish politics. He got radicalized in Britain, served a sentence, got returned, deported to Poland. He's a completely different guy now and actually tries to work as a former that makes people sensitized to the dangers of far-right ideologies. Interestingly, when he came back to Poland, far-right groups and individuals started being very interested in him as a kind of martyr in their eyes. Next slide, please. Reform UK, I mentioned we attended their conference and we interviewed their members, their candidates. You probably know, but just very briefly, it was funded in 2018 as Brexit Party by Nigel Farage. And it used to be a narrowly nationalist party. It didn't really pick up on civilizationist terms and concepts to the extent comparable with Britain First, let's say. But most recently, Farage started talking about Judeo-Christian culture. He didn't seem to care too much about this previously. And in 2024 parliamentary elections, the party had candidates who emphasized their Polish roots. Before I turn to them, here is a guy who really was quite well known on social media, a Polish migrant who conveyed another kind of myth about Polish migrants as extremely hard-working, no-nonsense arrivals. And I have to say, when we attended a Reform Party conference, this combination of Polish war heroism and hard work ethic was an inevitable conversation starter. So immediately they jumped into this. And no one was suspicious about our research, which also indicates that Poles have to be right-wing in their eyes. These are the candidates, and even on their profiles, they identified their Polish roots and benefited, utilized their Polish roots as significant, including John Burmich, who talked a lot about his very privileged background and the whole military history of his family. But let's turn to their narratives. What we see are certain... 3 minutes. Okay, I'll be quick. So World War II references, as in others, post-traditional values. One thing that I just would like to briefly note, with those recent pushbacks on the Polish-Belarusian border, one of the respondents saw this as part of the same struggle as the Battle of Vienna, right? So Poles preventing the entry of Muslims into Europe, in his eye. The next slide, I think we can skip. I was talking about the previous slide, and I think I have to skip the next three. I don't have time for that, even though it's quite fascinating how an extreme right organization positions itself, drawing on whiteness, modern culture, but also combining this with civilizationism. If we could go to the final slide, so that I don't take too much time, just to sum up and to explain what we've concluded from our findings. Well, first, we are convinced that the main limitations of existing research on the far right is that there is still a lot of methodological nationalism. So countries are seen as those containers and political organizations are seen as operating within those national containers, whereas what really is significant is what takes place at the transnational level, right? And that's also due to the nature of many of these organizations, which are not like hierarchical, highly formal parties of the past. They are sort of rhizomatic structures that can combine and connect in often unpredictable ways. Another limitation is the normative assumption in far-right research that concerns migrants. So it's assumed that far-right parties are inevitably anti-migrant, that migrants and far-right groups are opposed categories, inevitably and always opposed categories, and that migrants' political activism is always progressive, that they are either completely passive politically, or if they are active, then they engage on the side of progressive, liberal, emancipatory movements. As for our findings, we see quite different groups. I didn't manage to discuss the fourth case, but activists share broadly similar nativist, civilizationist views articulated with different degrees of sophistication, but that there is continuity there. What we see also is that there is demand from sections of British politics. It's not just, you know, Poles bringing some foreign import into this innocent soil of British liberal democracy. There is clearly resonance, and those Polish nationalist themes seem to reactivate. We had a great presentation on nostalgia. They reactivate nostalgia transnationally. They bring this, you know, Enoch Powell's vision of Britain to mind. And yeah, as I said, there is something in Britain that ensured reception for these ideas. Poles in Spain, for instance, voted in a completely different way than they did in Britain. And finally, civilizationism means that nationalism is articulated on a transnational level, but it's also globalized. And by this I mean that while it may be a global format, it then emphasizes specific aspects depending on where these people operate. Thanks a lot. That's it.
Thank you very much for this very rich presentation. Now I move to our next speaker. Let me go back to this. Dr. Siaza Shukri. Please, the floor is yours for 20 minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone. So my presentation is, as you can see there, Anwar Ibrahim's Civilizational Populism between the Muslim world and Malaysia. We've talked a lot about Europe today, and we go to the Middle East and a bit on South Asia. So I hope you guys would bear with me. I'm going to talk a little bit about Southeast Asia. I have to give the context for what we're talking about today, for what I'm talking about today. And I think it fits with what Professor Cesari was talking about earlier this morning, right? That we need to look at context-specific cases. So this is what I'm trying to do, that I'm talking about civilizational populism in Malaysia specifically. But I would like to say that for me, Anwar Ibrahim is someone who uses civilizational populism as a strategy, where his audience are actually the Malaysian people, specifically the Malay Muslims in Malaysia. So it's not like he's a, shall I say, like a hardcore populist. I wouldn't say that. In fact, I use the term soft populist to describe him because it's more of a strategy for him. So next slide, just a bit of introduction. See, the great thing about presenting late in the afternoon is that everyone else has already laid the ground on what is civilizational populism. But basically, as my colleague already shared earlier, is political rhetoric invoking religious and or cultural identity. We have this virtuous civilization, and in this case, of course, we're talking about Muslims supposedly being the virtuous civilization, or Islamic civilization being the so-called sovereign people versus threatening civilization. And of course, we have other examples that we've heard of throughout the day today, MAGA, the Hindutva movement in Turkey as well. So again, what I'm trying to say is that Anwar Ibrahim, he is our current Prime Minister, the 10th Prime Minister in Malaysia since our independence. He has aligned his rhetoric with the broader Muslim world, especially during this war in Gaza. So my paper, I shall say, is a working paper, so I appreciate feedback later on in the second half. It's a bit more contemporary, looking at what or how Anwar Ibrahim has used the war on Gaza for his benefit, and framing it as part of, being part of the Muslim Ummah, the Muslim world, what Malaysia should do, being a Muslim majority country. But as I was saying earlier, my argument is that it's more for the audience in Malaysia, and I'll explain that later with the next slide, please. We need to understand Malaysia's political landscape, to understand why we are here, why Anwar Ibrahim is doing this. So to those who are not familiar with Malaysia, our politics is ethnic-based, meaning that our political parties are mostly based on ethnicity, or unfortunately in Malaysia, we still use the term race, actually, race-based politics. So we have three main races in Malaysia, the Malays, so I'm a Malay, Chinese and Indian. So most of our parties are race-based. Either it's a Malay-based party, Chinese-based, Indian-based. The thing with Malay-based party is, if you're a Malay, you're a Muslim. So we have this interplay of religion and race in Malaysia as well. What we have is a form of consociational politics whereby the different parties work together to form a larger umbrella coalition. This is what we've had for the past 60 plus years. And then we have the rise of Islamization, what happened in the 70s, which affected the whole world basically. So Malaysia was not spared. Anwar Ibrahim was part of the government in the 1980s. So he was actually part of the Islamization process in Malaysia, the Islamizing of the bureaucracy, especially education, etc. So what's happening right now is we have three main coalitions in Malaysia right now. The first is Pakatan Harapan. So Anwar Ibrahim he's the leader of Pakatan Harapan, but he's the president of a party called Parti Keadilan Rakyat. Okay, what's so unique about the PKR, we call it? Parti Keadilan Rakyat is a multiracial party. So I just said just now that Malaysian politics is mostly ethnic-based. So this is where it becomes an interesting case, whereby Parti Keadilan Rakyat is a multi-ethnic party. Its leader is Anwar Ibrahim. And guess what? He is the current Prime Minister in Malaysia. So we were celebrating, right? We have a Prime Minister who is the leader of a multi-ethnic party, which is part of the Pakatan Harapan coalition. So the Pakatan Harapan coalition, we call it PH, is a center-left coalition. And then we have Barisan Nasional, which is a center-right coalition. So Barisan Nasional is the coalition that has been in power for 61 years, basically since before independence until they were replaced in 2018 by Pakatan Harapan. Now, Barisan Nasional and Pakatan Harapan are working together in what we call the unity government. So now they are friends, even though they used to be sworn enemies for decades. The interesting case is now we have what we call Perikatan Nasional, which is another coalition. So we are a coalition-based politics in Malaysia. Perikatan Nasional is the far-right coalition in Malaysia. So in Perikatan Nasional is where we have the Islamist party we call PAS. So most Malays in Malaysia, I shall say, supportive of either Barisan Nasional or Perikatan Nasional. So you see Anwar Ibrahim is outside of that. Anwar Ibrahim is leading Pakatan Harapan. So my argument is that Anwar Ibrahim needs to convince the Malay, especially the Malay voters, that he is still, what shall I say, that he is still quote-unquote fighting for the Malays, because the Perikatan Nasional narrative is that Anwar Ibrahim is anti-Islam. So this is where we see the civilizational discourse going on in Malaysia. Are you for Islam, against Islam? They're claiming that Islam is under threat in Malaysia when Anwar Ibrahim is in power. So this is the current situation. Next slide, please. So a bit on Anwar himself. So this is the tricky part. Anwar is, or he was known as an Islamist. In his youth, back in the 70s, he's an Islamist youth leader. He was the leader of what we call the Malaysian Islamic Youth Association, or what we call ABIM in Malay. So he's an Islamist who's always been pro-Palestine. This is not something new. This has always been basically in his DNA, what he has been fighting for. Why I said it's tricky is because despite all of this, despite his past and everything that he has done for Muslim causes in Malaysia, the opposition, the one that I just said, Perikatan Nasional, the conservative Islamist coalition, still paint Anwar as anti-Islam. So that's the situation for Anwar Ibrahim. So as I was saying, he and Mahathir Mohamad was part of the Islamization project in Malaysia in the 80s and 90s. He's an Islamist youth leader, but then he got kicked out of government in 1998 by Mahathir Mohamad. So that is when he's not reformed in a way, but he tried to portray himself now as a Muslim Democrat, not so much as an Islamist, but just a Muslim that is supportive of democracy in Malaysia. So that is his identity now. He's a Muslim Democrat. So this is where it's difficult for him to balance between this idea that, oh, I'm just a Muslim that is supportive of democracy, not necessarily an Islamist, but that's not what the Malay conservative wants to hear. They want someone who is an all-out Islamist. So there's this tension, as I put there, between the progressive coalition led by Anwar and the conservative Malay Muslim electorate today. Anwar is being accused of being a liberal, and in Malaysia, being a liberal has a negative connotation, especially for the Malay Muslim. Basically, a liberal means that you're anti-Islam, you're pro-West. It's not so much economic liberalism, it's cultural liberalism. Even though, like I said, he does have this Islamist past. And I shall add here that back in the 90s, or late 80s, early 90s, when he was still in government, Anwar Ibrahim is known to be more pro-West. When you juxtapose him with Mahathir Mohamad, who was the prime minister, Mahathir Mohamad is known to be very anti-Israel, anti-West, but Anwar is more conciliatory, right? He's someone more willing to work with anyone, and when he was kicked out of government, he went to jail for a few years. When he was released from jail, he went on this not lecture tour, he was lecturing in Western universities, in Oxford, in Georgetown. So again, people have this perception that, see, Anwar is pro-West. So again, this is not good for a Muslim leader in Malaysia. I'm not sure if you can see, go back to the previous slide. The bottom right picture is my latest article published by the ISIS Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore, which I wrote about this difficulty that Anwar faces in trying to balance between being this so-called Muslim leader, at the same time, portraying himself as progressive, a leader for all Malaysians. So this is what Anwar is facing right now. Right, so the next slide is basically what the main presentation is about, which is how he uses, like I said earlier, the unfortunate war in Gaza for his benefit. As I argue here, he's trying to reassert his Islamic credentials via the Palestinian issue. Like I said, he has this Islamist past, but somehow people or the conservative Malays do not believe him. So he has to, in a way, show that he is still a voice for the Muslim world. So this is the civilizational narrative that we are seeing that Anwar is using for his benefit. He's doing this to align with Malay Muslim sentiment because, like I said, the Malay Muslims in Malaysia are quite conservative, and we are all supportive of the Palestinian issue. No doubt about it that the boycotting movement, BDS movement, is very active in Malaysia. So Anwar is trying to align that with what the people want, and him being, I don't know what to call him, an Islamist, a Muslim Democrat, but he's trying to bridge that gap. However, as I will explain later, it doesn't really work in his favor. So what are the things that he did right after the war broke? He held this massive public rallies. There were two, if I'm not mistaken, in late October itself, in late 2023 itself. Thousands of people turn up, mostly his supporters, of course. During his speeches, he condemns Israel. He openly supports Hamas. So again, Anwar is trying to put himself as part of that Muslim Ummah, the larger Muslim community that he is vocally supporting. He also, since the Prime Minister, he blocked Israeli ships from docking in Malaysia. And it's a political issue because he pointed out that under Mahathir Mohamad administration, remember I said Mahathir is known to be more anti-Israel. He pointed out that Mahathir allowed these Israeli ships to dock in Malaysia. But he's saying, see, I'm not allowing it to happen. So again, he's trying to push this identity of him as a Muslim leader, basically, a strong Muslim leader on the international stage. Next, civilization populism in action. Again, basically, I'm just trying to frame everything that he has done. I kept on repeating already that he uses religious identity, the Ummah narrative, that this is in the name of Islam. We're here to support Muslims, Palestinians who are our Muslim brothers and sisters. He framed the support not just as humanitarian aid, but also again as a religious duty to help Muslims in Palestine and Gaza specifically. We, of course, Malaysia sent aid to Palestine, and also we had these medical evacuations. We brought the wounded to Malaysia to receive medical treatment, and this also became an issue in Malaysia. So next slide. So as I was saying, I argue that Anwar's doing all of this for his political benefit, but it's not working as he had hoped. The main problem right now in Malaysia is that we are polarized. We are polarized by this conservative liberal divide, basically. So on one hand, we have the Malay Muslims who are very conservative, support Perikatan Nasional, and then those, on the other hand, I won't even call them leftists right now, but they just don't trust the Islamists, the Perikatan Nasional Coalition. So Malaysia is very polarized right now. So it doesn't matter what Anwar tries to do, he can never, or I should not say he can never, it's a bit difficult for him to convince the conservative Malays that he is actually helping the Muslim cause. So what I'm trying to say is that it's not getting Anwar far actually, but he keeps on using this kind of civilizational narrative, thinking that it could sway votes. But also there are people who argue, but it's not really that case. Anwar, as I said earlier, has always been an Islamist. He's been pro-Palestine since his youth days as an Islamist leader. So this is not about him trying to win over voters. It is really who he is. I would say it's a combination of both. Definitely, it's really who he is, but there's an uptick of this kind of support and rhetoric from him since the Gaza war started. So this is why I feel like it's interesting to look into it. There are mixed reactions domestically, like I said, because people are just polarized. And also there's accusations that he is ignoring local issue. What I'm trying to say here is that, remember I mentioned earlier that we brought injured Palestinians, injured Gazans to Malaysia. There are those who, are not happy that you are spending this money to help Palestinians who are like halfway across the globe from Malaysia, when there are people back home who are suffering, who could benefit from government assistance. So that's why people are not fully supportive of what he's doing. Of course, Anwar counters it by saying this is for humanitarian reason. I think the quote is, he said that why people are questioning when it's for humanitarian reasons, etc. And then there's this controversy about BlackRock, which acquired Global Infrastructure Partners, and Global Infrastructure Partners is part of a consortium that was involved in the privatization of Malaysia Airport. So this was a huge issue as well, because BlackRock is known for its close ties with the Israeli defense. So the opposition, which means the Islamist Perikatan Nasional just now, uses this again to frame Anwar as, look, he's not really serious. He allows an Israeli-linked company to invest in our national asset, our airport, basically. So again, what I'm trying to say is that it's not consistent. What Anwar is trying to do, what he says. On his end, Anwar claimed that, not claimed, he asserted that it's not realistic to cut ties with companies just because they have Israeli ties. Again, what does this show? This is where I argue that it's really just strategy, right? It's just a populist, civilizational populist strategy for him to gain support by saying, oh, I'm pro-Palestine, I'm pro-Gaza, but when the opposition pointed out about BlackRock and then Malaysia Airport, suddenly he's saying, we can't just cut ties with companies just because of Israeli ties. So again, you see, this is quite murky, what is happening right now. That is why I feel like I have an argument here that it's really for strategic purpose. And then he faced a backlash when there was this CNN interview, when he agreed that Israel has the right to exist. Again, I think Anwar is trying to be this Muslim Democrat leader, right? He's not really an Islamist, but because of this one statement, he was attacked in Malaysia again by the opposition. How can you say this when you say that you are pro-Palestinians? And finally, there's this refugee tensions. Remember, there were people who we brought into the country. After receiving the medical treatment, they could not leave the compound where they were living in. So after a few months, as you can imagine, if you're stuck in one place, you get frustrated. So these Palestinian refugees were protesting. And because of that, there's backlash by the Malaysian people saying, you know, these Palestinians are not, they don't appreciate what we're doing for them, etc. So there's, like I said, it creates tension. Anwar's stance on the Palestinian issue creates tension at home, when the whole idea was trying to win over the Malay Muslim. Next slide. All right. So this is where I think, this is where I'm still working on this part of the paper, and I appreciate feedback. I'm trying to argue that what Anwar is trying to do, and this relates to, I think Prof. Cesari was talking early this morning about the transnational aspect. So this is the transnational aspect of it. Anwar is trying to put himself as this leader of the Muslim world. What would that do to his relationship with other Muslim leaders in the world today? So far, it has been okay. I mean, he had this, Erdogan visited him, I think in February this year. He called the late Ismail Hania. He had these calls with others. So what I'm trying to argue is that Anwar is trying to claim this civilizational legitimacy as a Muslim leader. You know, throughout this whole war, I've had people, journalists asking me, do I think that Anwar can do all of this because Malaysia is so far away from Palestine? Basically, we can be very vocal because there's no geopolitical risk to us. right? We can say whatever because we're just so far from the war itself. So I'm assuming this could be one of the advantage for UNRWA and for Malaysia on how we can use this kind of civilizational rhetoric, trying to put ourselves, or UNRWA to put himself as a Muslim leader without immediate repercussion. I'll move to the next slide. But I'm trying to, I'm not sure I want to warn, but that I'm just trying to say that if UNRWA pushes too hard on the Palestinian issue, it could lead to intra-civilizational rivalry, because we're talking about the civilizational narrative, Islam versus the West, or whatever, all kinds of civilizations that we have. But my fear is that it could lead to this kind of intra-civilization rivalry within the Muslim world. Because as we know, different Muslim countries have different relationships with Israel. Those in the Middle East have normalized relation with Israel in 2020. And some of them, like Saudi, UAE, they have better relationship with the US, with Trump compared to others. One of the things that the opposition in Malaysia like to point out, that after how many months that Trump has been in power, UNRWA has not received a call from him. Or he has not called Trump. Anyway, we see that there are differences, different priorities, different relationships among Muslim countries. So if UNRWA is pushing this too hard, how would the other Muslim leaders respond? And this is not something unthinkable. This happened in 2018 when Mahathir Mohamad, who was Prime Minister back then, organized this KL summit. And he invited Muslim leaders, but only a few turned up. Like Erdogan, that's the picture there, Khamenei came. But Saudi Arabia was not happy because they say that it's challenging the OIC. And through their pressure, they were able to stop Imran Khan from coming. They were able to stop Jokowi of Indonesia to come. So my argument is that this could happen. When you're pushing for kind of Islamic civilizational narrative, would there be a repercussion on Malaysia as part of the larger group of Muslim countries? So coming to my conclusion, UNRWA's civilizational populism as a political survival tool in Malaysia. Like I said, he's trying to win over the conservative Malay Muslims, but it's not really working. A lot of polls have shown that Malay Muslims are still support by the Malay Muslims for UNRWA's government is still relatively low at around 30%. Attempts to unify Muslim sentiment while managing Malaysia's plural society, as I was saying, UNRWA's finding it difficult to balance this. He wants to be this champion of Muslims, but he needs to remember that Malaysia is actually a plural society. Unlike Turkey, Malaysia's Muslim population is only about 60%. It's not even 70%. So he needs to balance that. Mixed success in swaying partisan conservative voters, like I said, it's not really clear if it's successful. So the final conclusion is, of course, like I think others have mentioned even in the second panel, civilizational populism is powerful, but it's risky. You can push for this narrative. You can say you are an Islamist. You've always been pro-Palestine since 50 years ago. But if you push too much on it, it can probably lead to division. And I'm talking here about division nationally in Malaysia, because I was talking earlier about the Muslims versus the non-Muslims in Malaysia, but also the division that I fear among Muslim countries. I talk about transnational politics. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So maybe the person on the floor can organize Q&A. Because it's going to be hard for me. I don't see the audience. So it's very difficult for me to take on the questions.
Two guys on paper. You can't hear me. There is one more paper.
Oh, sorry. I thought there was
I am defending my rights. I know my rights. So,
how
sorry,
come mistake? Hold on.
but we'll keep this short, right? Yeah, we'll keep this very short. I don't want to sleep while talking, so I'll come here. Um, Originally, we promised that we would, because this is a panel on transnational populism, our original idea was to focus on the Indian and Turkish diasporas in Australia, and this is linked to our second ARC project that I mentioned earlier in the morning, but we couldn't finish our field research, unfortunately. So we changed our topic, and based on a book that we worked on with Nick here, we'll talk about something else, but I think it's equally interesting. So can we go back? So it's religious populism and civilizationalism, international relations, and authoritarian turn. Here, what we did was to add 2 more cases to our original studies. So we've been working on Turkish civilizational populism based on Islamist identity, and the second one, Hindutva populism based on Hindu religion of the BJP, Prime Minister Modi. And then we decided to expand our research and look at how Putin is doing this with regards to Russian Orthodox Christian civilizationalism and then Shi's civilizationalism. It is not as religious as such, but still the underlying element is their Confucianism, the Chinese folk religion, etc. So this is similar to Christian populism, actually Christian civilizationism, in the sense that what they talk about is not really practicing religion or religiosity or even spirituality, but what the sociologists call belonging without believing or belonging without practicing. So they use it mostly when they want to otherize other people from other civilizations or religions, etc. So Western Christian civilizationalism or populism, what does that mean? And today you heard some examples. They're not really talking about practicing Christianity. Look at Trump. Yes, he held a Bible once, but other than that, but when it comes to Muslims and their culture, how they are infiltrating and changing our societies, how they are threat. So in the Russian and Chinese cases, these are like that in a way. And also they are framing their civilizationalism against Western liberal democracies. So they talk about their own civilization, but in the sense that how they are better, how their civilization is superior, and they are exporting this as well. Can we now move? And one more, please. So here in this paper, we look at how these leaders, we are looking at their speeches and how these leaders use civilizational rhetoric to first justify and legitimize their authoritarianism and oppression. And secondly, how they use this for transnational claims. So with Putin, for instance, Ukrainians, they are not really Russian, they are not really Ukrainian, they are part of our civilization. So they make these extraterritorial claims. And when it comes to diasporas, they do that as well. So Erdogan claims that he's not saying this very clearly, but that's the underlying message. He is the leader of all Muslims everywhere, including the diasporas or Muslim Sunni, especially Sunni Muslims in the West. So he's the caliph of all these people. Can we move? So we are looking at 4 leaders, and we looked at their speeches. Can we move on? Yeah, so over 10 years, we collected their speeches. It wasn't very difficult, with the exception of Modi. For others, they were on their official websites. some of the Modi speeches were there as well, but we had to also collect some YouTube speeches and got them transcribed. And we used DeepL to translate. We randomly checked some of them, and it works almost perfectly. Maybe I could even say that better than what I would translate Erdogan speeches into English. So its translation was better. And then we used NVivo software. And using NVivo is very difficult. You need to go just one word by word, so it would take ages. So we just randomly selected 3 events and 30 speeches for each. And in this paper, we are specifically looking at the narratives, and we have a discourse. We've done a discourse analysis. And can we move one more? Oh, okay. We can go back. That's the old slide. So we produced a book actually on this. Last week it was published, Weaponizing Civilizationalism, how Turkey, China, India, Russia, what's the rest? So fight against Western liberal democracy or something like that. I've forgotten our book's name. Anyway, so mainly we look at the cognitive elements, so narratives and discourses. But we are hoping to use these data sets, these old speeches, with our bigger team here, Anna Maria, Matt, and others, and to look at the political psychological elements and see how they use emotions as well. So in this paper, we'll just look at the cognitive parts, the narrative discourse parts, and over to you, Nick. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we move ahead a slide, please? All right. Well, we won't stay too long here, but an important concept in the book is this idea of authoritarian populism. And I think this is important just because people will say, well, why are you calling Xi Jinping a populist? And this is perhaps why, but I don't have time to dwell on that. Can we move ahead so everyone can have a brief moment to ask questions at the end and then go to the dinner as well? Okay, what did we find? So first of all, we found civilizationism. We assumed we would find it because these regimes refer to their nations as, at times, civilization states or as heirs to great civilization. So let me just very briefly run through what we found. So in the case of Erdogan, we found a very large amount of references to civilizations, 216 individual references. Again, within Vivo, you tend to get a lot because you go through word by word. So it's perhaps better to break things down into themes. So we found mostly anti-Western civilization sentiment, but a lot of civilizational pride. But there's another thing here which is interesting, which is this idea of the whole global South. So this sort of West versus the rest idea crops up. In fact, I think we'll see it in all of their rhetoric, all 4 regimes. It's quite important, particularly when they're talking to African nations. We found an incremental increase in civilizational discourse over 10 years with Erdogan. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yes, Modi. With Modi, we found a slightly lower emphasis on civilizational differences and clashes from Modi than with Erdogan. We found a kind of fluctuating number. There were about 15 references to civilization in his 2014 speeches. That increased to 20 in 2019 and 2020, but then it sort of went back down to about 17 in 2024. What did we find? What kind of themes did we find in his speeches? Well, there was a lot of pride in Hindu civilization. That was the main theme. And also the idea that Hindu civilization was great, but brought low by foreign forces, particularly Muslims, the Mughal Empire, but also, of course, the British Empire. And so there was a lot of anti-Western feeling here as well, which might be surprising to some people because Modi does have quite strong relationships with Western leaders, with the exception, of course, of, I suppose, the leaders of Canada. But perhaps we'll move on to the next slide, please. And we'll look at, yes, President Xi, the General Secretary of the Communist Party. So over a 10-year period, we found 231 total references to civilization. But what was interesting is that there's a lot of positive statements with Xi. He tends to focus on the greatness of Chinese civilization and the benefits it can provide to nations everywhere if they can learn from Chinese history. So there's a lot of talk about mutual, or shall we say, civilizational exchanges for mutual benefit. There's a great focus on the Communist Party representing China's 5,000 years of history, which is quite interesting, as if there was no break from that in the 20th century, as if it's just this thing that continued on and in fact is experiencing its greatest flowering now. We'll come back to that later if there's time. So can I go to the next slide? So now we move on to Vladimir Putin here. Unsurprisingly, there was some civilizational rhetoric. What we generally found is that with Putin, there's been an increasing amount of it. And a lot of it is a mixture of the greatness of Russian civilization and its particular qualities, which I'll touch on if I have time later, and on the inferiority of Western civilization, particularly the inferiority of liberalism and how liberals have betrayed their own civilization. The Russian people are often portrayed as victims of the sort of immoral and violent West, and the West. And you get this in all of the leaders too. There's this idea in Putin that Putin expresses where the problem with the West is that it keeps insisting that it has universal values. And Putin and the other leaders all push back against this all the time and say, no, we have our own civilizational values. And that becomes very important in legitimizing their authoritarianism. So if we can move on to the next slide. So question now is, how do these regimes construct their civilizational populism? Actually, can we go to the next slide again, please? If we can go forward, I think 2 now, that would be really great. And one more. Yeah, that looks good. I had 2 slides about Putin for some reason. How do these regimes construct their civilizational populism? So right throughout, it's used to define the nature of the people, elites, and the dangerous others. These are categorized via civilization. So for Erdogan, you have this ethno-religious classification scheme that incorporates restorative nostalgia for the Ottoman Empire, something I talked about a bit earlier. He uses this as an excuse to securitize minorities, particularly Alevis, Kurds, other people who challenge his regime, and of course secular nationalists, the Kemalists. And this, I imagine he does to encourage his supporters to seek his protection. He's protecting them because he's protecting their civilization, which is the Ottoman, but also Islamic civilization more broadly. Can we move to the next slide, please? So in India, obviously, we have Hinduism and Hindu nationalism, or Hindutva. This is very important to Modi. The premise of his civilizational populism is that he is rejuvenating this great civilization that once existed, and therefore he categorizes Indians according to a civilizational category. Are they part of the Hindu people who belong to the land, or are they part of the invaders who don't belong and are kind of polluting this holy land of India and preventing it from becoming great? Next slide, please. Russia. So what's interesting about Putin is that he speaks fondly of all religions and all different peoples because he conceives of, at least in his rhetoric, Russia as a multi-ethnic, perhaps not multicultural, but at least sort of multi-religious civilization state. However, this state has at its core, and we find this throughout his speeches, in his words, an ethnic Russian Orthodox core. And there is really only one great civilizational enemy that Russia has, and that's the liberal West. And it's very important to understand, as I'm sure many of you do, that his real problem here is with liberals and liberalism. Both inside of Russia, his key enemies are liberals, pro-Western people, and of course, the liberal West, more broadly in Europe in particular. He's an avowed enemy of liberals. He regards them as a dangerous minority who is spreading decadent ideas, anti-Christian feeling, and so on and on. And they're an enemy of the core Russian Orthodox culture of Russia. All right, we'll move quickly on to the next slide. We'll talk briefly about Xi. So it may be funny to talk about religion and Xi Jinping and an officially atheist regime that has, in the recent past, oppressed people of all religions. But of course, since the 1980s, we've had a religious revival in China. And what's happened now is that Xi and the Communist Party have encouraged the revival of Confucianism. I suppose this is not strictly speaking a religion, but it contains religious practices. But he's tolerant of Buddhism and he's tolerant of Taoism, as long as they don't challenge in any way his regime. Indigenous Chinese movements that do this, such as Falun Gong, are repressed. And of course, Islam and Christianity are under a lot of pressure, as I hardly need to tell anyone, I'm sure, in China at the moment, particularly Muslims in Xinjiang. So Chinese who practice indigenous religions, such as Buddhism, Chinese folk religion, etc., are accepted as part of Chinese civilization. Even if the CCP might prefer people place their faith in the party. However, Muslims and Christians are under suspicion automatically. Of course, we don't see a lot of this kind of rhetoric in Xi Jinping's speeches because he prefers to speak positively all the time. But it is there implicitly, and of course, we see it practiced in contemporary China. And of course, religious organizations tend to come under the control of the CCP more and more increasingly over time, particularly under Xi's rule. Okay, so I better finish up actually, really. I would like to talk for a little while about how this is used to legitimize authoritarianism. But I think we can perhaps already see how this is done. I mean, it's through this categorization that I've already described. So perhaps we'll just go through a few slides very quickly until we get to the final one, which is slide, I think, 21. Can we just skip to the final slide? All right, what could we take away from our book, which we all hope that you purchase one day? Well, I think that for the authoritarian regimes ruling China, Russia, Turkey, India, and we freely admit that two of these regimes are certainly more authoritarian than the other two, the final two. Civilizationism and populism helps them construct a transnational people, elite, and dangerous others. It helps them identify their nations as unique and complete civilizations with their own way of life in order to legitimize and justify authoritarianism in the domestic sphere and their belligerent acts abroad. And three, it helps them challenge Western and liberal norms, laws, and institutions globally. It legitimizes that challenge. Civilizational authoritarian populism is thus both a tool of legitimation for these particular regimes and a method by which they legitimize repression in the domestic sphere, but it's also a way of legitimizing their belligerence internationally. All right, well, I should stop right there. So thank you very much. If we have time, we can have some questions.
Okay, thank you. I apologize, but in the version of the schedule I had, this paper didn't show up. So that's why I was ready to go directly to questions. Maybe to get us kick on the discussion, we are dealing here with very different approach, some on the local, some on the national, and some on the international. I think the only paper that I could localize in the local is Guy paper, because what you describe in the case of the Israeli populism, it deals very much with the local geopolitical order, or more precisely the Palestine-Israel tension right there. But I would like to ask you, is there a transnational aspect to this? Or because you didn't touch on it much, how does it go, for example, with the Jewish diaspora? Does it, what would be the connection there? For the second paper, it was quite fascinating to hear how some, I don't know if it's the right term, popularization happen out in the host countries. And I would like you to say a little more about that, about this, this perspective on transnationalization that is not coming from a sort of center like, Turkey or China, but is actually going through a sort of rhizomatic understanding of populism. That just to kick the discussion out. It's not, you don't have to take all this as such. For the paper on Ibrahim Anwar, that was also quite fascinating, because you mentioned that he's positing himself on this civilizationism and actually trying to latch on the pan-Islamic discourse. And you show some pictures, him visiting or being visited by some of the leaders that everybody has talked about. Could you say a little more about that? Because it came at the end of your presentation, and I understand your hesitation. Is he Islamist? Is he not Islamist? I mean, if he called himself a Muslim Democrat, it can be credible. I mean, there was a time where Erdogan himself called his experiment a Muslim democracy, and actually he said it's like the Christian American experiment. So I don't see any conflict here between the populist aspect. What intrigues me is, why would it be a populist? In the sense that it seems to me that it's talking to a certain elite, either in Malaysia or transnationally. So a few clarification here would be interesting. For the fourth intervention, the more I listen to this use of civilization, the more I think that it becomes synonymous with the North-South divide, it seems. Because how does the civilization operate? It's very much, it's not just emotional, which I kind of understand. It's also positing the country in an international dynamic of power. And what we are seeing since October 7 is clearly a shift from what used to be indeed a more identity politic to the North-South divide. And interestingly, the South is not automatically local. You have pro-South people in the North and vice versa. So have you thought of looking at civilizationism beyond, I would say, the religious aspect here? Because again, religion is not only the belonging is not only abstract. Of course, religious practice is not involved, but they are practical, concrete politics coming out of this belonging. When you get out of the convention, the Istanbul Convention, when you nationalize Hagia Sophia, of course, I mean, this is concrete realpolitik. It's not just an abstract symbolic belonging. So I would like to find out from you, how do you now look at the civilizationism within this change we are living in? And maybe nobody has a clear answer on that, but it seems to me that things have shifted since October 7. That's, yeah. And that's all for me in terms of questions.
Shall we answer now? You want to take more questions? What's the process?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know who is leading on the floor, but yeah, Guy, if you want to take on, yes.
So I think that interestingly, it's not a Jewish civilization what is being here, but actually it may be a Judeo-Christian civilization, which is in a very odd way because Netanyahu has forged very strong ties with the Republican Party in the US, often at the expense of its ties with the Jewish community in the US. So while the Jewish community tends to vote Democrat and being liberal, Netanyahu actually picked on the Republicans and kind of pushed away some of the liberal Jews. And this kind of, I can go out more about this, but we don't have much time. Also in Europe now, there's a very strong relation between the Israeli right-wing parties and European right-wing parties, which share the anti-Muslim sentiment. That's what brings them together. We are both united in our fight against the so-called Muslim threat. And ironically, some of these parties in Europe have a very strong anti-Semitic roots. But still, there's this connection because we have this joint interest of anti-Muslim. So I think it's also a civilizationism. It's kind of a strange phenomenon in the Israeli case. So this is kind of a Judeo-Christian discourse. I'm not sure how deep it goes into theology. I think it's more about political stances.
I cannot hear. We cannot hear.
Can you hear me, Jocelyne?
Now we can. Now we can. Yes. Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Does that work, Jocelyne?
Yes. Yes.
Perfect. I wanted to come to the defense of my Polish friends in London in response to Professor Zaborski, and this is more a remark or an anecdote rather than a question, but it so happens that my engagement in the anti-Brexit campaign and ultimately my election to the European Parliament was based on an incident in front of the Polish Centre in London, the POSC Centre, and I lived 5 minutes away from that in West London, where 2 days after the Brexit referendum, there was an attack on 2 Polish people, simply for speaking Polish in the street. They were beaten up, and that convinced me that I had to do something to stop the Brexit referendum-induced xenophobia that we saw increasingly. So just to say thank you to those of my Polish friends in London who were not at all involved in any nationalist or far-right campaigns, but quite on the contrary, were very much on the victim side when it came to xenophobia in the UK. So just as a remark, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Yes, thanks a lot for this comment. It made me realize that perhaps I didn't emphasize strong enough that this is a small minority, small but very vocal minority. They do not represent Polish population in Britain, but increasingly they vote on the whole more to the right than Poles in Poland. And yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, this opening from the British far right is a new thing. The BNP in the past, just after the EU enlargement and the arrival of large number of Poles, demanded immediate deportation of everyone and complete stop of any migration from Poland. Nigel Farage, when he led UKIP, said that, vilified Poland in contrast to other migrants. He said he preferred Indian migrants or migrants from the former British Empire than Poles. So yeah, you're absolutely correct. But there is this trend that's very worrying, and I think it needs to be explained both by Polish dynamics and by British dynamics. Thank you.
Any more questions, Bülent?
Yeah, actually, my question is for Jocelyne Cesari as moderator, but based on her keynote speech in the morning. Could you hear me, Professor Cesari? Yeah, okay. We are so familiar with the concept called as political Islam or political Islamism, but we rarely hear about political Christianity. And we also experienced in Turkey how political Islamism evolved into Islamofascism. Maybe the authoritarianism is not enough to define it. And I wonder whether you see any risk of political Christianity to transform itself to Christio-fascism. And in the same framework, this question I would like to repeat for Ben-Porat, Professor Ben-Porat. Could we equalize political Judaism, if we could say, with the Zionism and or neo-Zionism? And could you see any risk of the similar threat from this politicized Judaism to turn to be a kind of fascism? Thank you.
We can't hear you, Jocelyne. You are muted, I guess.
Yes, thank you for the question. I think I even wrote on one of the slides, political Christianity, to refer to the situation of America. I think Christianity is part of the fabric of American society. So there is a separation at the institutional level. But again, when Tocqueville goes to America, he marvels on the presence of Christianity in the fabric of citizenship. Because the political is not only at the state level. I think when it comes to religion, it's important not to focus only on the state. What I have witnessed, especially in the case you call political Islam, is that the strongest, most efficient way of engaging, mobilizing politically is to do work in civil society. And this is political too. It is not, the state is actually a very now polarized and controversial point for people who want to mobilize on a religious basis. So yes, political Christianity exists everywhere. I mean, you go to Africa, you go to Latin America, you see the mobilization of people to be good citizens based on religion. What you are referring to is another level when this kind of mobilization is channeled into institutional politics with a deliberate goal to change the rule of law. And that's a kind of challenge for democracy right there. But again, there is nothing quote unquote bad with political religion if we look at it through the way of civism and of civil action and mobilization for, as we say in Arabic, maslaha, the common good, but the common good of people, not the public interest of the state. So that's the kind of distinction I would like to make here.
Thank you, Jocelyne. Yes, we have one more question.
But Guy, you wanted to respond? No, maybe?
Sure, I can respond. I agree with Jocelyne. I think that first, that the fact that religion is being politicized is part of democracy. I mean, people are religious, want to bring their ideas, their mores into the public sphere, which I think is fine. Regarding Jewish nationalism, well, remember that Judaism is both nationality and religion, and we always conflate these things. So, yes, some of the Jewish nationalism can and is becoming fascist. I mean, if you talk about the Ben-Gurion and Smotrich, their ideology is pretty much fascist, but not all religious Judaism is fascist. You have and not all fascist is religious. So I think these things we are mixing them together. But I mean, you can be a good secular fascist and be a good religious fascist, good in the Iranic sense, of course. And you can be a religious person who is democratic and tolerant, and a second person is intolerant. So I think these things need to be better distinguished. So there's no necessity there. There's no inevitability. The fact that religion is being politicized is not a path to fascism, but it can be when it's extreme nationalism. So I'm hoping to answer the question, but that's what I think, like kind of a first thought that I have on these issues.
Yes, thank you. And sorry to speak as a French with relationship to religion, which is maybe a little bit different but, in some other countries. But all your presentation have the same point of view. It was normal, and in a way it was how religions could help some political leaders. But I wanted only to speak on the other hand. What is the interest of religion to be backed by all these leaders? What's your point of view about that? And probably it's different in many countries, but in a way, is it good for the development of the religions to be helped by authoritarian leaders? I don't know if you want to answer one by one about that.
You sort of inverse that you focused on how it is for religious ideas to be hijacked in this way by authoritarian leaders, if we were to look at this. In the case of our subjects, I think they focus more on the religion they hate than the religion that they practice or claim to practice. So that there is more kind of Islamophobia there than Christian fundamentalism. We have those groups that are consistently fundamentally religious, like Warriors of Mary, quite active in London, but at first look, they are not that politicized. It's only when you start having deeper conversations with them, then they will tell you that this country, namely Britain, is going to the dogs, and that London is a hell. And if you ask them why, they say, oh, you know why. So I think religion is more used as a tool than being, as a discursive tool than being a real motivator, if I may say so. I mean, that's just 3 pennies from myself. Anyone? Sorry.
Well, to be honest, I didn't really catch it, but if it's about how religion is hijacked and it can lead to authoritarianism, in the case of Malaysia, Anwar Ibrahim may not be the best example, actually. So the Islamist party that I mentioned earlier, so I do a lot of work on that. The Islamist PAS, they are the one that truly, in a way, has hijacked Islam in Malaysia. To otherize the non-Muslims, that has led to a form of it could lead to authoritarianism. It hasn't been there. They haven't reached that point yet, but their rhetoric has turned very dangerous. The way that they speak of the non-Muslims in Malaysia make them feel like they're second-class citizens in their own country. So the Islamist past is the best example in Malaysia of how religion has been, hijacked is the right word actually, we use that a lot in Malaysia, how religion has been hijacked and abused by past for their own benefit.
Thank you. If I understood you correctly, yes, the populist and authoritarian rulers, they hijack religion and they use it. But I think it's a marriage of convenience in some cases. It's been like that throughout history, actually. Look at Henry VIII and others, and the ulama and the sultan, whatever alliances all over Muslim history. So you see all these things. So it's not new. And look at the United States, Trump, and how his appointments at the Supreme Court is that not benefiting the religious supporters of Trump? He may not be a religious person, but they have an alliance, and both, I think, benefit from that. At the end, maybe spirituality is losing. We don't know when religion is politicized, but I don't think that's a one-way street. So that's my 5 cents. Any questions?
I also tend to agree it's a two-way street. I think it depends who you ask. For some religious people, it's a very convenient marriage where you get benefits from political alliances. For others, it's an ideological marriage. We can agree on many things for family values, for example, both some of the populists and the religions. And some religious people will feel they're being hijacked, that religion is being hijacked for political purposes which are not theirs. So it may depend who you ask. I think religion in the singular is something very difficult to discuss on those questions.
Can I just a very quick follow-up, because I think it's a very interesting question, and that is also maybe just to follow up on what Antoine asked, and that is, and I speak here as a declared atheist, what about the role of religion actually fighting, combating authoritarian and fascist regimes? And I have to say that all of the major world religions practice some form of peace, conciliation message. And I just wanted to know your opinion. We've had very brave defenders of this religion, Jews for Palestine. We've had, of course, Christians who oppose the Nazi regimes. We do even have 1 or 2 Russian Orthodox priests outside of Russia, I hasten to add, who speak up bravely against Putin. I don't think we should forget those religious leaders, and maybe you want to comment on their role in the political debate.
Yeah, I would like to follow up on that. That is a very important point. To think that religion is only on the side of authoritarianism is a very truncated political approach to religion. For example, who remembers that the EU was founded by 2 people based on their strong Catholic conviction? Schumann, and now the name of the other one, and Adenauer, right? That was the intention to pacify Europe that brought them together. At the time, everybody thought that they were a little out of their mind, and maybe they were, but to show you that religion is not only on the side of authoritarianism. And I push back against that because it does affect the kind of scholarship we do. Religion is a good or bad, it depends. Like ideology can be good or bad, it depends. And you are here, and I regret not to be here with you, but in Poland, who was the institution that fought against communism for a long time before any other option could exist? So yeah, religion, and I can multiply the example, but I don't want to turn this into a whole list. So yes, religion can help toward transition, toward independence, and toward restoring sometimes human rights.
Thank you. Bülent, do you want to come and wrap up? You have, okay.
The question. So these are can only have a kind of broad reflection, but you're absolutely right. And you know, the late Pope Francis was an example what he said about migrants and the positions he took. But I guess in the case of those respondents who seem to be committed to our respondents who seem to be really committed to their interpretation of religion, they just ignore him or see him as a communist and traitor of the church, and they select whatever fits their ideology. So either we have this Warriors of Mary movement, which is at odds with the Catholic Church in Poland, but the Catholic Church in Poland does not want to lose this potential constituency, so it's not too consistent in challenging it, and various aspects such as a degree of sexualization of Virgin Mary in their discourse. You know, in imagery they have those pictures of Mary that resemble Japanese manga, and when they talk about Mary, they talk about going with her on the date as the most beautiful girl you could meet. You know, it's a bizarre discourse. Or in the case of this fascist organization that I didn't have time to cover, it's the pre-Trident Reform Church, so you know, Mass in Latin and extremely conservative. There is this Bishop Williamson in Britain who actually hosted these guys. He's a Holocaust denialist, you know, extreme anti-Semite. So I guess, you know, religious institutions are so broad that they will cater for various constituencies, and they may have progressive representatives like Pope Francis or much more reactionary. Unfortunately, I will risk a statement that Polish Catholic Church tends to go more towards a reactionary and extremely conservative rather than progressive and charitable way.
I really appreciate that question because, I totally agree. I'm a practicing Muslim, obviously, and of course, I don't believe that it automatically leads to authoritarianism. So in the case of Malaysia, see, Anwar Ibrahim is trying to use or trying to correct the narrative on religion and politics. So he has this framework called the Madani framework, trying to portray Islam as this progressive religion. We can live side by side in a multi-ethnic nation like Malaysia. He's trying to really embed this in society, but it's been difficult because of what we're talking about the whole day today, the Islamist populists that are there, that simplifies things, that makes it, the reactionary part of the Islamists is something that the Muslims can easily accept because it's easier for them to understand rather than talking about this more progressive nature of Islam. So it's true that religion can play on both sides. But for the case of Malaysia, it's really a struggle right now, actually, trying to get the Muslims to accept and to understand the more progressive nature of Islam that's talk about peace, as you're talking about.
Yes, a big thank you to all panelists and moderator for the insightful and thought-provoking session. Your contributions have added real depth to today's discussions, and to our audiences. Thank you very much for your energy and great questions. For those registered for the gala dinner, we expect you at 7 p.m. Please be there, and we could find a relaxed atmosphere to go on our conversation. And we say a big shalom till those participants from Israel. Thank you very much for your contributions. Have a nice day.